I don't want to insult anybody, but honestly, if you say this and you don't think about the implications of identity politics in Singapore, you're probably from the majority. Because honestly, if you are a minority in Singapore, and I don't just mean like a racial minority or religious minority, any kind of minority in Singapore, you should have paid more attention to this speech.
He also said that he had spoken to all of the Workers' Party's Malay candidates. Darren was saying that he would rally votes for any political party that agreed with his demands which were along racial, religious lines.
So just to clarify, what considerations were on the government's mind in terms of trying to nip this issue at the bud?
Think about it. In Singapore, majority Chinese, we all know this. If the Chinese play identity politics, that's it. Like, what's to stop them? Because at the end of the day, we are a democracy, right? And in fact, that was one of the things that people were saying. Like, if we are a democracy, so what's the problem with basically going with the majority? Isn't that the whole idea of a democracy? But many people don't understand how important it is and why exactly it's important. Identity politics, if we go there and you're a minority, you lose. Full stop. It's as simple as that. So if you have not been living under a rock and you follow Parliament in any way, or you just read the news, you'll probably see Shanmugam and Pritam's face all over the place because they went at each other for a long time in Parliament about something that, I mean, they spent a long time talking about it in Parliament, but honestly, if you look online, if you look at like just regular people and how they felt about the whole exchange, many people are scratching their head and going like, why is this? Why this again? Because if you don't know what this is identity politics. It was G25, that thing that happened months ago. But apparently, the minister felt that it was something very important. He wanted to bring it back up in Parliament, and so they spent a long time talking about it. I watched the full thing. There were some pretty interesting points, but so this is the kind of reaction that people had online, because some people are saying like, why are you talking like PAP? Why are you talking about this? Why are you not instead talking about stuff that really matters? Things like, raising COE, $1 million HDB. So bread and butter issues basically, which most Singaporeans really do feel a lot about because, obviously it's getting bad. And I think, I don't want to insult anybody, but honestly, if you say this and you don't think about the implications of identity politics in Singapore, you're probably from the majority. Because honestly, if you are a minority in Singapore, and I don't just mean like a racial minority or religious minority, any kind of minority in Singapore, you should have paid more attention to this speech, as well as the debate that came out of it. Because identity politics, if we go there and you're a minority, you lose. Full stop. It's as simple as that. Because that's how it works, right? Like think about it. In Singapore, we have, like majority Chinese, we all know this. If the Chinese play identity politics, that's it. Like, what's to stop them? Because at the end of the day, we are a democracy, right? And in fact, that was one of the things that people were saying. Like, if we are a democracy, so what's the problem with basically going with the majority? Isn't that the whole idea of a democracy? So this is why I think people should have started to pay a little bit more attention to this speech. And I get it. Like, it's not sexy. Race and religion in Singapore is really not a sexy topic. It is very important to us, but many people don't understand how important it is and why exactly it's important. Because obviously, if you're talking about things getting more expensive, obviously that hurts you a lot more. You can see the damage right in front of your eyes, and you fear about it for your kids. But if you fear about the future for your kids, identity politics should be a big part of this as well, because the whole country is basically built around identity. Let's see what Shanmugam had to say about this.
On 24th of April, Darren made further public statements. He reiterated his call for Tampines voters to vote for Mr. Faisal Manap.
By the way, this No Deros guy, we got personally singled out by him because of this whole saga in the GUE, as in at Plan B, because we also kind of jumped in a little bit onto this whole discussion when he was called out for playing this kind of like race, religious card during the GE. And he declined to be interviewed by us. Unfortunately, I think it would have been good actually if we had a discussion, because to be fair to him, yes, like he did something that I think most Singaporeans will say you really shouldn't be doing. But at the same time, I can see where he's coming from. And obviously, like those are he's a Singaporean. He has every right to do this. And there are real questions, I think, because at the end of the day, we are a country where there are, several big minority groups in Singapore. And obviously, each of these groups are going to want to have their interests represented in politics. It's not going to be good, right? If you just come in and say like, oh, you Malay, your Malay interest issue, that one not national issue, let's not talk about it. Like, obviously, that's not healthy either. So I think, if only Noderos had come up, it would have been good. But what to do.
He also said that he had spoken to all of the Workers' Party's Malay candidates. Darren was saying that he would rally votes for any political party that agreed with his demands which were along racial, religious lines. And he was comparing two Malay Muslim candidates and saying, vote for Mr. Faisal Manap because he has been a more vocal champion of race and religion for Malay Muslims.
So if you don't know what this is referring to, and I mean, if you're not from the Malay/Muslim community, you may not actually understand, because if you're Chinese, if you are Indian, if you're Hindu, for example, you're gonna be like, what rights are you talking about? Like, what championing are you talking about? Because I mean, you're not gonna see this if you're not from the community. But I mean, I'm half M, so I'm Muslim. So if you remember during the whole hijab issue a few years back, Mr. Manap was seen as basically one of like the champion figures for campaigning for a very long time to finally get that across the hurdle. And so this is part of it. The idea that basically Masagos, who was the minister in charge of Muslim affairs, didn't really do his job, like didn't really represent the Muslim community's interests. But at the same time, Mr. Manap, who was the WP member in parliament, was quite actively campaigning for that.
That was the main troubling issue, not whether some of his demands were absurd, or whether one agrees or disagrees with his demands, or whether one agrees or disagrees with his assessment of candidates. Asking Singaporeans to vote for political parties and candidates along racial, religious lines is a reckless thing to do.
Yeah, so this line that, you know, if you say to somebody, and I mean, just imagine you probably had this conversation with some of your friends, if you are from a minority group especially, right? Like, oh, does this candidate maybe represent me a bit better? And I don't just mean minority in any way, like minority, because if you recall during the GE, there were also a little bit of like small little controversy surrounding certain candidates that were seen as being a bit more maybe pro-LGBT or more LGBT friendly. So it can be a minority in any way, in any politically relevant way. Race, religion, sexual identity, whatever. You might be thinking, why is that reckless? I mean, the fact is, if let's say I'm a Muslim Singaporean, if I'm a Chinese Singaporean, why should I not consider this part of my identity when I'm voting in an election? Because I want some kind of representation, right? We got GRC, what? In fact, that was a very common criticism that came out some online, because people were saying things like, you talk about race and religion shouldn't mix with politics or whatever, but hello, we got GRC. Like, you literally must have at least one minority candidate in each GRC. Isn't that politicizing it? And I think this is why it's important to talk about these issues, because if you don't, then these kind of question marks remain. And I think it makes sense, right? Like, if you think about it, okay, like, obviously, if I must have a minority candidate, like, it matters. Your race matters. Your identity or your cultural community, it matters in politics in Singapore. And it's not just it matters because people vote this way. No, it matters because the bloody constitution says so. You must have. If you don't have in the GRC group, you cannot run. So then I think that's where we have to think about it a little bit closer, because what actually is, for example, the GRC? What is it meant to do? It's not only the GRC, there are other schemes in place in our politics that refer to race. I mean, the CMIO model, everybody knows about this, right? Like, Singapore is clearly not a race-blind society. Our government is not race-blind. You need to fill in boxes telling people what race you're from. But the question is, what is that for? Versus what this so-called identity politics is using your identity for. Because from, like, let's say, reserve candidacy for the presidency, your GRC system, your race matters, your identity matters, because it's there to ensure parity. It's there to ensure some level of representation. I mean, some people, if you're critical about it, you might say that it is basically affirmative action. You're saying like, oh, because of your race, that's how you get in. That was a criticism that was leveled at Halimah a few years back, if you remember. But at the end of the day, the point is we want there to be representation, because we don't want a situation where, for example, in parliament, 90-something seats, everyone Chinese, everyone Malay, everyone Indian. Obviously, that's bad for the country. Or for the presidency, you know, like for like 20 years, 50 years, it's just Chinese guy on the portrait. Not exactly a very good show. And so those kinds of policies are in place to make sure that there's representation. But when you talk about identity politics, you're talking about I am Malay, so I'm going to fight for Malay interests. I'm Chinese, so I'm going to fight for Chinese interests. And what Shanmugam was saying in that whole speech was essentially that was not the kind of politics that Singapore was built on. I mean, we got some neighbors that, might do that, but we don't. Because for us, it's about national interest first. Obviously, then there's going to be one big question mark, because in Singapore, especially, for example, you have a very clear majority that's from one community. So I think it's a valid criticism to say, then are you conflating? What if you're majority, then your majority interest just becomes the national interest, because you are the majority, what? But that's where that restraint comes in. If you notice, right, this whole debate between the two of them, Pritam actually tried at one point. He actually asked, what law did... No, there was, actually, I have that. Let me play this.
Contemplation to issue a restraining order against him under Section A of the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act. Because the Prime Minister decides to take a break from the hustings and make a statement in the national interest. So just to clarify, what considerations were on the government's mind in terms of trying to nip this issue at the bud?
And I think that Pritam was actually being quite smart when he was doing this, because that's essentially it, right? It's kind of like throwing it at the minister, like you say so much that he did something he shouldn't have done, but what did he actually do wrong? There was no statement. I mean, at least the statement that was issued during the GE about foreign interference didn't mention Oderos, what? And this is where I think this is where the question of our political culture comes in, because I mean, let's not forget, right? We're a very young country, 60 years. And this G in particular was when a lot of commentators were saying, okay, Singapore is finally coming to grips. Our political landscape, our culture is finally maturing. Because for a long time, everybody said, Singapore, PAP, government, all same. This year, it's quite clear that it's not. In the sense that government is not necessarily PAP. WP did a very strong showing this time round. Maybe not as strong as last GE, but quite clearly we are maturing as a democracy. So when we talk about identity politics and what Pritam was asking, what did he do wrong? The question is, the answer is, strictly speaking, nothing wrong. Because Nodero is Singaporean, what? He has every right to talk about Singaporean politics like I do. But the question that I think we need to ask is, when we say we shouldn't do this, do we need the law to tell us that? Because if you need the law to tell us that, technically, you can. But it's going to be a headache, because how are you going to define not doing identity politics? I think that's a little bit out of whack, basically. But it's about, can we have that exercise of restraint from all political parties to not do this? In a sense, it's a bit like foreign interference. Foreign interference, obviously, we do have actual laws against it. But all of the political parties in Singapore during the GE came out and very strongly stood with the Prime Minister and said, we reject foreign interference, because this is not the kind of politics that we want in Singapore. We don't want us to turn into some kind of proxy state or whatever, where you got big neighbors who can just come in and interfere with you however much they want. So it's that same kind of logic being applied here to identity politics. Is this something that we shouldn't do? Not because it is illegal to do, but because we can all recognize that in Singapore, this is not the kind of shit that we want. And that the politicians themselves are going to be, in a sense, maybe they need a crash course or workshop or whatever, to basically tell them, okay, if it's going into that line, if you're starting to appeal to people by saying, for example, I will champion your community issues if you vote for me. If I give the tudong, you should vote for me. If I give, for example, Taipusam as national holiday, you should vote for me. That is the crux of this, which sadly, I think was a bit missed, because in the response that Shanmugam gave afterwards, it's parliament, right? So politician versus politician, obviously they're just going to be fighting at each other. Sometimes I feel like it's not the most productive for Singapore, but okay whatever, it's their job quite literally to be doing politics. And so on the topic of foreign interference, right, actually, there was also a segment where the minister referred to foreign interference, because obviously this is something that I think Singaporeans don't talk about enough, which is that, let's face it, right? My generation, if you are in your maybe late 20s to early 30s, you're from the same generation as me. We live in a new political environment. We live in a new era, globally, internationally. That's just it. It's a new age that we're living in. It's very different from the kind of reality that our parents grew up with internationally. Locally also, we've kind of entered into a new era of politics. So you can't really take reference to like, oh, last time it's always like this. It's always been like this. It's never been a problem. Like that kind of thinking cannot go anymore, because if you're in my age group, like, I mean, sorry lah, but if you care about your next generation, you care about your kids, you need to realize that shit is different right now, and that you need to take these things a little bit more seriously, because if you look at world news, you will know these things have very serious consequences for countries around the world. We have not really gone too far yet, and thankfully, because in a sense, we do have opposition parties as well who play ball. They don't, like, for example, even after this whole speech, Pritam didn't come and say like, no, I want to reserve the right to play identity politics. No, it was quite clear that all parties in Singapore can, at least on paper, at least on some level, agree we shouldn't do this kind of thing because it will be bad for Singapore. But so let me get back to this foreign interference thing, because when you talk about identity politics in Singapore, you cannot run away from the question of foreign interference.
Must be dealt with in future is one of the key reasons for this ministerial statement. Let me now turn to the contest in Tampines GRC in the last GE. As I said earlier, the WP fielded Mr. Faisal Manap in Tampines to contest against the PAP team led by Minister Masagos. That the Malay-Muslim vote in particular was being targeted was obvious, not just to Singaporeans, but pertinently also obvious to Malaysian observers.
Who else, right?
Malaysian politicians from PAS jumped in. They saw an opening and urged Singaporeans to vote along racial.
So this is another point where, if you're not from from a minority group or whatever, you may not realize this, because I'm guilty of this. I'm Chinese, right? Like I don't know that much about Malaysian politics. Like it's like we don't watch Malaysian news, obviously. I don't follow Malaysian politics as much now, a little bit more obviously because of the work that I do. But growing up, like it was not in my sphere at all. Like Malaysia, like what's PAS? I think I can say I spent like the first 20 years of my life not knowing at all. I've never heard about it. Like the people around me didn't talk about it, because that's just not. I mean, it's not my community. The language also, I didn't really speak it, so like it's not my thing. But so some background, if you don't really know what PAS is, it's an Islamist. It's been described as an Islamist party. So basically, they push for the expansion of Islam in politics in Malaysia, and obviously it's their country, so they have the right to do whatever they want. Not to mention that Malaysia, it describes itself as an Islamic country in a sense, lah. Very different from Singapore, obviously. So it's unthinkable, is what I'm saying, to have something like PAS in Singapore. And I dare say, I think I can confidently say, I think most Singaporeans, definitely not Muslims, but even some Muslims, I think, will reject and say that they don't want something like PAS. They don't want something like an Islamist party in Singapore.
And religious lines. PAS National Treasurer Iskandar Abdul Samad expressed support for the WP's Mr. Faisal Manap. PAS Selangor Youth Chief Muhammad Sukri Omar reposted a social media post stating that PAP's Malay-Muslim MPs cannot be trusted. More than 60 years ago, Malaysian politicians said the same things about PAP Malay-Muslim leaders.
So this is when the foreign interference thing comes in. I mean, of course, this time around during the GE, because it was the Malay-Muslim community that was in the spotlight, because PAS is from Malaysia. But you have to remember that this is not about tackling any specific community. And I think in the questions after the ministerial speech, actually, some MPs actually did raise the question. I think Zul, for example, he did ask, like, are you trying to kind of say that this is a Malay community issue? And I mean, quite clearly, it's not. Minister said that as well, because on paper, this can happen to any community, especially, and this is when I think what I was saying earlier about like how in Singapore we are a very diverse country, but not just that. Think about the migration patterns that we've been having more recently. As everybody knows, our TFI is very low, but somehow population is still going up. What does that mean? That means that we've got new citizens, we've got people coming from all around the world. This is what I mean when I say that when you talk about identity politics in Singapore, you cannot run away from foreign interference. Who are our biggest three groups in Singapore? CMI, Chinese, Malay, Indian. All three of these groups have a national country outside of Singapore. China, Malaysia, India. You can't run away from this. Foreign interference is going to be lurking at the background. I mean, of course, you may think I'm just being like conspiratorial or whatever when I talk about, China is actually playing the long game and trying to influence the Chinese in Singapore. I'm not saying that it's like a clear, directed goal that they're doing. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that inevitably, you're going to have people coming from those different cultural backgrounds, coming from those different political backgrounds, in the sense of like their own country, they've got their own systems, the way they think about things, the way they do things. It's not malicious. I'm not saying that everyone's out there trying to get Singapore and destroy us from within. No. What I'm saying is that because of our migration patterns, it's inevitable. You can't run away from it. You're going to end up having more and more new citizens that are coming from China. You're going to have more citizens coming from India. You're going to have more citizens coming from maybe Malaysia. These things will impact the way that we think about politics, that we think about identity, and we think about community in Singapore. That is why these two issues, foreign interference and identity politics, it's very easy to mix them up. Pritam actually did a little bit of he got mixed up and he got called out for it by the minister in one of the Q&As. But it's a fair mistake, to be honest, I think, because you can't run away from them. They are so linked in Singapore. I think most Singaporeans will be able to stand by very strongly and say, we reject foreign interference. I mean, Singaporeans are actually a very patriotic bunch. If we smell that somebody's trying to mess with us on a national interest kind of level, we will bristle up and say like, screw off. But there was another part of the question, which I think Kenneth Tiong from WP actually asked a very good question, which was about Critical Spectator. If you don't know who Critical Spectator is, thank God, you don't need to know. Okay, like the stuff that he says is really not worth paying too much attention to, especially if you have respect. Like the guy is a little bit vitriolic and not exactly the most pleasant of people who write about stuff. But he is a commentator and he has a following in Singapore. You can see him on Facebook, on Telegram or whatever. Apparently he's run into a few community guidelines issues before. So that's the kind of guy that he is. So let's look at what Kenneth Tiong asked.
Clarification. The minister has set clear bars for responding to foreign influence, immediacy, categorical rejection, and explicit disavowal, regardless of ambiguity or delay. Will the minister now apply those same standards to Michael Petraeus, the Polish national whose Critical Spectator
that's Critical Spectator
platform has published racially charged commentary on Singapore politics, including a piece titled, quote, WP abandons Muslim voters, turns to the Chinese, end quote. His platform was previously taken down from Facebook for policy violations. He continues to try to influence our politics from his foreign perch, this time favoring the PAP. Will the PAP categorically reject and disavow his support today, just as the minister demanded that the Workers' Party do so within 24 hours?
Did you see that? Come on, you gotta give him applause for this, right? Because don't forget the fact that he is a first-time MP and he is standing up to ask a question that I think is pretty direct and pretty sharp and aimed at the minister. Of course, minister came back afterwards to kind of clarify because I'm not going to play that part, but basically there was a misunderstanding of the term foreign interference. But I don't think anybody should hold it against Kenneth because, to be honest, even among my circles, I speak to people about this kind of questions, and we also sometimes feel this Petraeus guy seems to be crossing the line into foreign interference quite a lot, and in ways that are just really not very pleasant and not very constructive or helpful for Singaporean discourse at all. Not to mention the guy's not even from Singapore. He's not even from here. I don't know why he's got so invested in doing this. Let's actually see what Minister said.
I thank the member for this question because different people ask this. I think it arises from a misunderstanding of the law. There are a variety of people who have commentaries running on Singapore. The Economist comments on politics in Singapore. The New York Times runs articles on Singapore. The South China Morning Post runs articles on Singapore. And Michael Petraeus is not the only person who is a foreigner who runs commentaries, sometimes for the government, sometimes against the government, sometimes favoring the Workers' Party. We can cite various people who favor the Workers' Party who are foreigners. That doesn't amount to, within the definition, interfering with our local politics. If we took that definition, every day we'll be doing nothing but taking down and trying to object to various international journals. Hundreds of articles appear, hundreds of posts appear. It's not the government's business to be going and censoring all of this. And nor is it going to be possible. But if there is a specific...
This, I think, was a missed opportunity by the minister because, I personally would have really appreciated it if he actually defined positively, because what he said was this was not the definition of foreign interference, but I wish he had explained positively what foreign interference actually is. Because since he didn't, I'm kind of left a little bit guessing. And from what I can see, I'm guessing that foreign interference, like you cross that line when you actually endorse and say, for example, oh, the policy is, like it's different to say, just say, oh, policy is good, or this policy not so good, or this policy whatever. It's a different thing when you cross the line and actually say, vote for X party, vote for Y party because of blah, 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 blah. Like actually telling people and directing people to vote, which CS has not done yet. Even though if you do follow him, you will know he very clearly has a PAP slant, and it's the most obnoxious, most irritating way of writing. And I wish he would shut up. Like I wish that he has less influence in Singapore, because I don't think we need that kind of rhetoric in Singapore. But the fact is, he exists as a commentary, and I've seen other commentary from other, remember when we first changed PM and whatever, there were many articles and commentaries that were written about that move as well, like why it was Lawrence Wong. So that's what Minister is kind of saying, that you can't actually, you need to draw that line between foreign interference as well as just running commentaries. In his opinion, at least from what he's saying, CS, critical spectator, hasn't crossed that line into foreign interference. But I just wish that he had, said, he's a bit inflammatory. Yeah, sure. We shouldn't stand for that kind of politics or discourse in Singapore anyway, but that the government, technically speaking, can't come in and force people to stop just because of this. But I think on balance, it was a good question by Kenneth. And as a first-time MP, honestly, good job. It's not easy to do this and to stand up and ask a question as bluntly as this to somebody like Minister Shanmugam. Parliament is obviously the highest chamber of the country where politics and whatever is discussed, blah, 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 blah. But sometimes because of the nature of politics, you got politicians just going at each other for no good reason. Sometimes it feels damn petty. And I feel like sometimes the bigger message gets lost. And there's also some context that maybe is not really put in place. And honestly, if you're a regular Singaporean, you probably don't care as much about what's going in Parliament also, because you don't have time to follow 8 hours of Parliament. Let me know how you feel about this. I'm gonna try to do this a little bit more frequently moving on. Maybe not just on Parliament, maybe on other things as well. But let me know what you think. And yeah.